I mean, we love family members often without liking them. And with a lot of our friends, we like them a lot without loving them. And, there are friends that we like and love, for sure. And there are family members that we like and love as well. But liking is a sentimental something. And loving is something, it's a very mystical connection that we have with other people. It's not just sentiment. On the contrary, it's a very deep bond that goes beyond liking.
So we are going to be talking about whether or not we should be friends with our family and how much effort we should put into those family relationships. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Paula Ferris Show. I'm your host, Paula. I'm so glad you're here. We've been doing a month-long series on friendship and looking at it from a lot of different angles. We kicked off the series with a conversation about the importance of having deep, close friendships, how those are vital to our overall health, and how to cultivate those deep, close friendships. And then we had a conversation about why it's important to be friends with people who aren't like you. And then last week, my husband John joined me to talk about whether or not we should be best friends with our partners. And we are capping the series today with a deeply intimate and personal conversation about our family and those dynamics, and whether or not we should be friends with our family and how much effort we should put into those relationships and invest in them. And joining me is Professor Arthur Brooks. I have been wanting him to join me on this podcast for about 9 months, ever since I heard him speak at a leadership event last year. And he talked about the habits of the happiest people, and one of those habits is investing in family. If you're not familiar with Professor Brooks, he's a professor at Harvard Business School, a behavioral scientist, and teaches about happiness and leadership. And what he's going to say in this conversation, I hope, will really relieve some of the tension that you might feel with your own family. And I guarantee what he's going to say is going to surprise you. So do we need to be friends with our family, and how much should we invest in those relationships? And when is it time to walk away from relationships with our family? I'll be honest, I'm struggling a little bit with this. Currently, I'm going through some challenging family dynamics, but a couple of years ago, my sister and I weren't speaking. We have since reconciled, and we are in a really great place. But family, it is true that saying that they are our greatest source of happiness and our greatest source of unhappiness. This is a really thought-provoking conversation, so stick around for my takeaways and to hear more about my aha moment. Without further ado, here's Professor Arthur Brooks. So, Professor Brooks, I have been dying to have you on the podcast since I heard you speak at the Global Leadership Summit in 2024, and I couldn't be more thrilled that you are capping this series on friendship and that you are joining the podcast. Professor Brooks, I know you want me to call you Arthur. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks for the show that you're doing. You're lifting people up and bringing them together, and that's my mission too.
Oh, that's amazing. So, Professor Brooks, as we conclude this series on friendship, I really wanted to dive into the dynamic of friendship and family. Should you be friends with your family? How much effort should go into family relationships? And really, it stems from your talk at the Global Leadership Summit. You talked about the happiest people on earth, and they had 4 habits. One of them was faith, one was family, one was friends, and one was meaningful work. So
Right.
obviously, the happiest people in the world have family in their lives. I want to jump right in there. Let's define family first and foremost for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, family is something that it's kind of a porous definition. A lot of people define it in different ways, but generally what we're talking about is our nuclear and slightly extended family. I mean, these are your parents, these are your sisters and brothers, these are your kids, these might be your cousins, depending on how close they are to you, and your aunts and uncles, grandparents, if they're still alive. And that's what we're talking about. The people around you who have a genetic similarity and who your brain is actually attuned to say, these are my kin. And, this is a lot of what I talk about, the fact that psychology is biology, and biology
Right.
is how we link to each other in bands of 30 to 50 individuals 250,000 years ago. A lot of our happiness still comes from these tendencies.
Yeah, you used the word, I think I'm going to say it right, neurobiological ways. There's neurobiological ways in which we need our family, and I can't wait
Sure.
to get into the science of it. But let's address the elephant in the room. Family dynamics are tough. They're challenging. I mean, I look at my siblings. We are so different. My own children came from the same mother and father. My husband and I, same circumstances. My 3 kids couldn't be any more different. But family dynamics are really, really challenging. Different personalities. But what is your research telling you right now about family? Because we know it can be the biggest source of happiness and the biggest source of unhappiness for most
Yeah,
people.
our expectations are super important. And one of the things that we want and that we think is accessible and we think is normal is that you and your siblings will be just tight as a tick. You're going to be so tight. That's not usually the case.
Yeah.
The truth is you're much closer to the friends that you choose as opposed to the siblings that are chosen for you, that are chosen, from heaven for you. It's a different kind of relationship. And so there is friendship between siblings. Some siblings are extremely close. My mother and her only sister they talked every day, every day, every day, every day for decades. Some people are really close. My wife, we've lived in the States for more than 30 years. Her mother lived in Barcelona. She talked to her mother every single day on the phone for 30 years. There are relationships like that, but that's not actually the norm. That's not what we should actually expect. We can have very, very close relationships with our family members without having, the kind of relationship we would have with the friends that we choose.
Yet globally, family, again, is the biggest source of happiness and the biggest source of unhappiness. I look in my own life, Professor Brooks, there was a time when my oldest sister and I weren't speaking, and that was one of the top 3 hardest moments in my life. The other 2 were when my dad passed and then when my mom passed away recently in February. I mean, I'm wearing my mom's T-shirt because I miss her so much. And
Yeah.
so it's so true, but most people globally would consider their families, their extended families, but their siblings, their parents, I don't know about their cousins, how much you would put those in the bucket, but their families to be the biggest source of meaning in their lives, even
Yeah.
regardless of how close we are, correct?
Yeah, that's true. And there are connections, neurobiological connections between family members that don't exist even between friends, even very close friends. When you think about it, people will say to me, my students will come at, the beginning of December after the Thanksgiving break, and I'll say, how's Thanksgiving? Like, Aunt Marge. It's like, what's wrong with that? Like, she won't stop talking about Trump. Right? She loves him, she hates him, whatever. It's like
Yeah.
whatever the problem is. And I'm like, and it's like, I can't stand Aunt Marge. I can't stand it. And I said, okay, back up. If you had a bad crisis and called Aunt Marge at 3 a.m., would she pick up? And they're like, of course. And then I say, and if Aunt Marge had a big crisis and she called you at 3 a.m., would you pick up? And says, obviously. But you can't stand her. That's the weird essence of family relationships, where if there's a person who's not in your family and you can't stand them, forget the 3 a.m. phone call. But Aunt Marge, oh yeah, you're going to take Aunt Marge's phone call when she actually is in need. And that's because we have a different kind of connection. You can love without liking, right? And with friends, you can like without loving in the same way.
Oh,
And those are
interesting.
very mystical differences in connection, and we need both.
Can you say that again? Because I've never heard it described that way.
Yeah, I mean, we love family members often without liking them. And with a lot of our friends, we like them a lot without loving them.
Oh,
So there are friends that we like and love for sure, and there are family members that we like and love as well. But liking is a sentimental something, and loving is something. It's a very mystical connection that we have with other people. It's not just sentiment. On the contrary, it's a very deep bond that goes beyond liking. And so you'd say about you had a schism for a little while with your older sister. And during that time when you weren't speaking, if she had called you, she had a crisis, of course you would have picked up. And she's like,
mhm,
I need you to come right now. You would have been there. You would have been like
mhm.
in the car, you would have been there, right? And something happens as a crisis in the family, you would have been drawn together by the crisis, notwithstanding the schism. That's loving without liking. And that's a
Wow.
very, very magical thing.
I have never heard it described like that, and it is so true, because even in that schism, that season, which, by the way, I felt so much unrest, and when we finally reconciled,
Yeah.
I had so much peace. But I did love her, I didn't like her, and that's such a great way to really explain that. You talked about family dynamics at the holidays, okay? Joe shows up and doesn't like what Aunt Marge has to say. You write that 1 in 6 people aren't talking to a family member because of politics, but we do need our family around us because of the neurobiological ways in which we have a connection to our sense of self. That's super deep, all right? What do you mean by needing our family and the neurobiological ways to have sense of self? Is it basically we don't know who we are outside of them? Explain that to us.
Well, they are to a large extent us. And so one of the secrets to living a well-balanced and happy life is knowing yourself. The people who are very unhappy. They don't know themselves very well. They're living a kind of a fiction, or they're living in a haze that has to do with drugs and alcohol and addictive behaviors, and they're just strangers to themselves. And that's an alienating thing. You need to know yourself. And one of the best ways that you can know yourself is by knowing the people who are closest to you genetically. They're closest to you biologically, or at least they're closest to you environmentally. One of
Right.
my kids is adopted, and a needle in a haystack. She was born in China, and so who knows who her biological parents were. It's all environmental as far as we're concerned. But one of the ways that she knows herself is by knowing me. And so even though there's not a whole lot of liking in a lot of cases, the linkages that we have, remember, I mean, your parents are who you're going to become. Your children you're trying to be the person you want them to be. Your sisters, even when they irritate you, are the other you in a lot of ways. And so one of the best ways to know you is to actually have a continuous relationship that you work on with forgiveness and forbearance and patience with the people around you who are a human mirror in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Do we lose our sense of self if we don't have our families in our lives? That neurobiology?
Yeah, it can be a real problem. And so people who have a schism and they walk away really from their families and they're like, they're dead to me. I never want to see them again. There's a real emptiness. There's a real sadness that has to do with the fact that they've sheared off a part of themselves. And again, some people have no family, but that's a really hard thing too. So if you're an only child when both your parents die, it's a very, very hard thing. The hardest thing is not just that you miss your parents, you become a little bit more of a stranger to yourself. And that's one of the things that you have to cope with, you have to deal with. And that requires a little bit of work. Now, again, nothing is insurmountable. We all have problems. We all have things that we're missing, but we shouldn't walk into a situation where we're bereft voluntarily. And that's one of the reasons I talk about trying to, reconcile, to forbear, to be as patient as you can possibly be, and to avoid some of the dumb errors that people make where they have, a break, like even a permanent break with family members. And remember, 11% of mothers who have adult children are not speaking or have any contact with at least one of those adult children.
Wow.
11%. That's a lot.
That is a
Yeah.
lot. Okay, this all makes sense, losing the sense of self. My dad passed away 6 years ago. Mom died almost 6 years to the day that dad passed away, and I have felt like I've lost a little bit of my sense of self, almost like my tectonic plates have, fallen out from underneath me. And so I'm wrestling with that. Who am I
Yeah.
without my family? But I want to level set with everybody, because you write in your book, Build the Life You Want, which kudos to you co-authoring with Oprah. That's a flex right there. But you write within the book, there is a chapter called Building Your Imperfect Family. So let's level set. We know family dynamics are challenging, right? But you write that tension and chaos and conflict are normal. You talk about strange and magical, mystical relationships because we did not choose them. So do happy families even exist, Arthur?
Yeah. I mean, sure, but it depends on what you mean by a happy family. The Hallmark card family,
Mm-hmm.
the family on TV that's just really getting along and going out on vacation, having a great old time. That's pretty rare. I mean, it really is quite rare. And it's just human dynamics and the fact that you're thrown together and you're very different people and you didn't choose these mystical relationships. That leads to a lot of tension. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Again, loving sometimes without liking and accepting that. And you have to accept two things. Number one is we don't always like each other. I accept that. If I don't like a friend, that's not my friend. But if I
Totally.
don't like my sister, it's still my sister till death. And the second part is accepting the loving part, which is a wired in kind of loving is the way that this works. And so it's like, sorry. And by the way, this is my concept of marriage as well. And that most religions conceive of marriage. You've been married for a bunch of years. He's your kin. He's
Mm-hmm.
your kin. And that means like, sorry, there's no escape hatch. Kind of like there's no escape hatch from your brother or sister.
Mm-hmm.
It's loving, and sometimes I guarantee you, Paula, I mean, I don't know anything about your marriage, but I guarantee you don't like him every day.
No, I don't. But
And
I love him,
yeah, yeah,
and I
yeah. And the
choose to
good thing
love
about
him.
marriage is that it's a fusion it's the apex of both
Yeah.
friendships and family. That's why it's such a mystical thing. That's why Christian people often talk about the antenna to the divine is your marriage. But the whole point of it is that these are inviolable relationships. They're just not supposed to go away. And when they do go away, it's like you're losing part of your body. It literally feels unnatural.
Yeah, because of the neurobiological connection. So I guess maybe my question might have changed. I was going to ask you, do you need to be friends with your family? And I think I know what you're going to say. You're probably going to say no, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be close with them and in
No, I
relationship
know.
with them, right?
Yeah, it's great when you're friends. It's great when you're friends. But you're not always friends. There are a lot of things that would make it so you don't like each other. I get it. And then you got to keep working, you got to keep working, you got to keep working because you're stuck on earth together. And if you try to not be stuck on earth together, you're sawing off your arm. And that's a problem.
Yeah. So how much saying that we don't necessarily need to be friends with our family, but we do have this deep connection, our sense of self is kind of intertwined with them. How much effort should we be putting in relationships with our family members, with our parents, with our siblings, and our children?
Yeah, well, with your parents is different than with your siblings for sure, and with your kids as well. And a lot of people don't do the work with their parents, and the reason is because they've kind of developed an ATM like relationship with their parents. When they were kids, it's the parents give, 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 and the kids take, 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 and the kids never grow up. And so the result is I don't got to call my mom. If my mom wants to talk, my mom's going to call me. But that's not right when you're both adults, and you have to develop into a bilateral adult relationship with your parents. This is the number one piece of advice I give to my young adult students. My average student age is 28 for my classes because I teach graduate students. And one of the things is you want a better relationship with your parents, stop treating them like ATM machines. Get off the family plan. If you're 28, your parents shouldn't be paying for your phone, for example. I mean, you need to actually have an autonomous lifestyle, and then you need to be treating them as, the way that they have traditionally treated you. That means calling them up and saying, what's going on, mom? Like, how are you feeling? And taking an interest in the things that they do, keeping track of the things that they've got going on in their lives. When they say, I'm going to the doctor tomorrow, calling them immediately afterwards, what happened to the doctor? And if they're really worried about something, say, why are you worried about that thing? Giving your parents more advice, you know, and that sort of thing is really, really important. That's a bond that adult children of aging parents are most responsible for establishing themselves. Most aging parents don't know how to do that.
Right. And like, how many times have I told my kids, well, you wouldn't treat your friend like that.
Right.
It's that
Right.
ATM, that transactional relationship. You write in that chapter of Building Your Imperfect Family, again, from the book you co-authored with Oprah called Build the Life You Want, that there are 5 common challenges that make family life complicated. Those 5 common challenges are conflict, compatibility, negativity, forgiveness, and honesty. And I really want to park on the whole conflict aspect of it because it just feels like these relationships, I don't like them. They're full of conflict. Why do I need to work at this relationship if all it's doing is bringing me heartbreak, heartache, and it just feels like it's a giant pain in the butt?
Yeah, I get it. And the reason is because if you take a conflict, which is kind of a worldly conflict, and you let it turn into a schism. See, conflict is one thing, schism is another. Schism means that you're cut off from each other. The pain is going to be greater.
Okay.
The pain from the conflict is less than the pain of the schism. And it's funny because I talk to people like this all the time where they're like, I'm done with my sister. I'm done with her. I'm done with her. But they're talking about it all the time. And the reason is because they're in acute pain. You need to deal with the pain because it's actually the cost benefit analysis in your life is such that schism is not worth the pain. The conflict is better than the schism. And then learning how to deal with it is an important thing. And so that's one of the things that I recommend. And again, this is not, Paula, talking about cases of abuse.
Right.
This is accepting the cases of abuse because abuse is a different kettle of fish. When there's actual abuse in your family, that's when schism can be appropriate. But newsflash, differences of political opinion are not abuse. I don't care what they say on TV. The media is actually trying to drive our families apart because the media is part of the problem in this country that's trying to create a culture of contempt because they're productizing us. When we're fired up and angry and hateful and afraid and we're cutting off our family members, that we're better customers for the media. And the media and politicians are actually doing this. They don't have our interests at heart. All they want is our money and our eyeballs and our attention. So don't let that happen to you. That's not abuse.
Right. And I totally get that. I mean, I worked in mainstream media for a very long time, and I think that the media is in many ways to blame for this great divide in our country. And we often throw around that word toxic a little bit too casually within families, and it's not really toxic. It's just a difference of opinion and views.
Right.
Okay, so we're talking about family being our greatest source of happiness and unhappiness. Okay, I don't like my sister hypothetically, but yeah, and I really don't want relationship, but I keep talking about that lack of relationship. Like you said, it can consume you. Tell me a little bit about what do you think is the source for most family conflicts? And again, you say conflicts are normal. Family unhappiness is a signal that something important is right where it should be. You're upset because your family matters to you. So what's the source for most family conflicts?
Yeah. The number one is differences of behavior or values. And behavioral differences, I live a different way than you live.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually okay. The problem is when the response to behavioral differences is a values break, where you basically say, okay, I voted for Trump, you voted for Harris, therefore you're a bad person. Those are two entirely different things. So the behavioral differences can create a conflict. The values differences create the schism. And that's the biggest thing. So and this is classic between the generations. So like somebody comes home from college and says, I have decided that I have completely different political views than you, and I have different social views than you, mom and dad. That's okay. Actually, that's not fun. That's not something that can create a lot of yelling around the dining room table. Where it becomes a problem is if they say, and I've also learned from my professor that because you vote and think in this particular way, that you're an evil person. You're an evil person, and I have to reject your values.
Mm.
Values differences like that, values rejections, they lead to very, very dangerous schisms. And that's what activists always do. Activists are always cults. They try to get between family members. The first thing that you do if you're a cult leader is that you try to separate kids from their parents. And that's what activists on campuses are. They're just cult leaders. And they're trying to separate kids from their parents. And the way that they do that is by using schism. And they use schism through values breach.
Okay, so the difference between conflict and schism is basically cutting somebody off from the family. I will say, so Arthur, my dad's from Lebanon, and visiting my family in Lebanon after he passed, we went to the small mountain village where my jiddu and sittu met and married. Jiddu and sittu are Arabic for grandfather and grandmother. Yeah. They are so interdependent upon one another. They rely on one another. They get upset if you don't ask for help. They are doing everything together. They are washing their clothes together. They are cooking together. They're raising their children together. Everything. And here I don't know. I feel like things are so messed up in Western culture. Here in the United States, we don't ask for help. We don't have family members living with us anymore. Right. We don't rely on our family. It's almost like we're set up to fail when it comes to family because we aren't interdependent. And whereas in other countries, they're dealing with famine and poverty and war, but family is everything to them. They rely on their family. What are you seeing in the data, the research about how different things are here in America? We don't rely on our family. We've distanced ourselves, and what's the overall impact on our happiness and our health because of that?
So it depends. And what we found is the United States is an inherently itinerant, mobile population. And part of the reason is because it's a pioneer population. You know, it's an immigrant population of people who left a country, came to a new country, moved west continuously. And so the result is the culture is that people get up and move. Now, that's less so. It's actually that's been cut in half compared to the 1960s, where in the 1960s, the chances were 1 in 5 in any given year that somebody was actually going to move. In any year, 1 in 5. Now it's 1 in 10. So it has been cut in half. We're less mobile than we used to be, despite kind of all the characteristics. So the result of that is that the happiest people, they might or might not be living around their parents, but they're very involved in community things to get kind of surrogate family. One of the things that Europeans find really remarkable about us is how involved we are at church, how involved we are in civic organizations. And that's what Alexis de Tocqueville, the famous French writer from 1835, he writes a Democracy in America. Everybody quotes de Tocqueville all the time because he came and he said, Americans are always doing these civic things. And they're getting together to raise a barn or to send missionaries to some place or to, raise funds for an orphanage or just to have a club. Why? Because we don't have families around, because we're a bunch of immigrants and a bunch of migrants is the way that works. So people who don't have either, that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Now, I've looked at this for years and I thought to myself, I left home when I was 18, never went back for more than a week. in
Same.
my entire after 18, right? I mean, it's like,
Mhm.
bye-bye. And I moved to Europe when I was in my mid-20s. Sometimes I didn't see my parents for years at a time. And I always thought, Paula, this is my greatest source of regret. My parents were very interesting people. My father was a mathematician. My mother was an artist. And I thought, they're super interesting. I got to get to know them. And then they died. They died young.
I'm
And I'm like,
sorry.
what? And I thought to myself, what am I learning from this? Like anything else, bad things happen. What am I going to learn? I'm not going to repeat that. I'm not going to make that mistake. And so the result is that, not long ago, we had a big family meeting. About 2 years ago, we had a big family meeting where my kids who are now growing up, because my kids are now, I'm a grandfather. I'm working on my fourth grandson at this point.
Amazing.
And I said to my adult kids who are 27, 25, and 22, where do you want to go to raise your families where you can make a good living and we can be more or less in the same place? And we made a decision and we all moved. We all moved to
That's
one place.
incredible. Wow.
And I
Love that.
live with my son, daughter-in-law, grandson, working on the next grandson, and the others live up the street. And so I see one of my grandchildren, I see one of my grandsons like every day, every day, every day, every day. He lives in my house.
You
And I
live
see
in the
my
same
son.
house with one of your kids,
Yeah, yeah, we have 3 generations under one roof. It's like a 1940s Catholic family.
which is
Um,
actually would have been normal in the
it would
early
have been, and
1900s or in other
it's real
countries.
weird. It's
Yeah.
real weird now, but we did it on purpose because I got the data. Now, not everybody has to do that, but you gotta do the work. You have to do the work. You actually
Mm.
have to do the work such that you can actually be the person that you wanna be, as opposed to, and again, you don't have to make your family into a cult. You don't have to this, like, us against the world kinda deal. But it's really helpful. It's really
Yeah.
helpful for all of us,
Yep.
I love babysitting my grandson, and I come home and he's happy to see me, and he knows
Yep.
me really, really well, and that's what I want. I didn't
Yep.
have it, and so
Mhm.
everybody who was watching and listening to this, if you didn't have that, so go get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That your history is not your destiny.
And if I'm being honest, Arthur, I left home as well after my senior year in high school, never went back home. So I grew up in Michigan, went to a small school in Ohio, and I never lived in Michigan again. And one of my regrets is that I wasn't able to be present with my family when I was raising a family, and especially when my parents were at the end of life. And so I have even talked to my daughter about this because she's entering her senior year in high school, looking at colleges, and Clemson's just around the corner from our home, and
Right.
UGA, University of Georgia, is 90 minutes away. And I don't want to guilt her into it, though. But I have expressed to her that I really wish I would have been closer, and the importance of family around and proximate and doing life together. I wish I could have that back a little bit.
Yeah,
So
no, I get it.
I'm with you, but I appreciate you're not just going to leave it there. You're going to do something about it, and you're going to create that life that you wish that you had.
And the science exists for a reason. I mean, we talk about these things not just because kind of gee whiz.
Yeah.
This stuff actually has actionable ideas that we can live in our lives. You're doing the right thing with your daughter. Your daughter's going to be happier if she's closer to home. She's going to be better adjusted. She's going to be lonely in her first semester in college. She's
Hmm.
going to have her heart broken by a boy. And it's going to be really, really helpful to have her mom and dad there. It just
Hmm.
is. The biggest mistakes that American families make, by the way, is kicking the kid out of the nest at 18, sending him all the way across the country and saying, good luck to you in college. That's a mistake for most people. And that's an institutionalized mistake. And so what happens is the universities have this relationship with kids that's in Latin is called in loco parentis. They're supposed to be like surrogate parents. And guess what? They've done a bad job by propagandizing all the political nonsense and firing them up. And just basically, it's like, I don't care how drunk you get. I just don't want you to drive drunk.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't care if you're actually sexually promiscuous. Just have safe sex. It's like, that's like bad parenting.
Yeah, yeah. I know. And I remember you telling me that at the Global Leadership Summit to just have her stay close to home because she needs to be within a day's drive because it's the first
Yeah.
time that she's going to be without her parents. So I remember
Yeah,
distinctly
that's right.
you
That's the first
sharing
time we
that.
talked about it. That's
Yes,
right. It wasn't
that
on
was.
stage. It was actually
No,
we were in the green room or something, I think. Yeah.
exactly. Totally. So going back to the conflict, you say that we shouldn't avoid it, but how do we manage it and navigate it? Because it's going to be, it's not just necessary, but it's normal. So how do we
Yeah,
navigate
you
it?
have to acknowledge that this is a normal thing. There's a lot that you actually have to put up with. And a lot of it is just laughing it off. I mean, one of the great things about being married is you can laugh about your siblings to somebody who really knows them well enough and knows you love them. but and you know that your siblings are laughing about you too. It's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
the greatest thing that we can actually do for all of our troubles in life is have a great laugh.
Mhm.
'Cause, let's be honest, it's pretty hilarious.
It's I
You know?
feel so free now that you said I am free to love my family, but not like them. I've never
Like,
heard it described. I mean, that just I feel
uh,
like that's a total paradigm shift in
yeah,
how
I
I've
know, and
related to my family. Yeah.
oh, yeah, totally, and so the other thing is to think about giving yourself advice as if you were a third person. So describing if somebody that you liked a lot and cared about came to you and said, I have a thing with my sibling. I have this schism with my sibling, or a real conflict, at least, with my sibling. And I'm like, and your friend would be like, "What happened?" Or you'd say to your friend, "What happened?" And the answer would be, "This thing happened in under these circumstances." And you'd be like, "What?
Yeah, yeah,
What?
yeah,
Are you
yeah.
kidding me?
Uh-huh.
That's unbelievable." And you'd like,
Mhm.
and the person, and you would be trying to crack up your friend and being like, "It's fine. Look, this
Yeah.
is every family. This is what's actually going on." And then what it would prompt you to do, and this gets to the heart of an answer to your question, what do you do? Is that you start opening up relationships and just don't make it dramatic. You don't need like some big, I still love you. No, it's like,
Mhm.
how you doing? Happy birthday. Did you see the game? It's just like, if it's you don't even have to bring up a problem. It's
Right.
no big deal. With your
Mhm.
family, the people you love and don't like, it's like, disregard the things you don't like. Just
Yeah.
disregard them. It's that easy. It's like, "Oh, no." Some therapists can be like, "No, no, no. Gotta confront the No, you don't. Don't confront anything."
I love it. I love it. Okay, conflict can lead to estrangement. You mentioned earlier that stat 11% of mothers, I think between the ages of 65 and 75 with at least 2 kids are estranged from one of their adult children. I need you to speak to the person who's really struggling with their family dynamics and just kind of wants to walk away and not have a relationship. But you say never give up on the relationships that you did not choose if possible. Of course, there's the
Right.
caveat if abuse is in the scenario. But you say your relationship with your family is especially difficult. Working to improve it might sometimes feel like a lost cause. It's easy to throw up your hands almost every day. We hear from people around the world who feel stuck in family problems that seem like they have no solution. Maybe you've said, I just want to turn my back on those people and get on with my life. But giving up is almost always a mistake because those people are, in a mystical way, you, your spouse, your siblings. And giving that up means losing insight into yourself, which is a lost opportunity to gain knowledge and make progress as a person. So, Arthur, speak to the person hearing that, but they're struggling with the dynamics and really struggling with whether or not they want to stay in relationship with their family member.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways to be in a relationship with a family member that doesn't have to accentuate the conflictive dynamic. The great thing, there's a lot that's wrong with the modern world and the way that we talk to each other. Back in the old days, you would have lived next door to your sister and you're not getting along with your sister. It's like, oh my, it's like, this is really, really dramatic. You don't live next door to her anymore.
Mhm.
Start texting. That's a really non-conflictive, non-confrontational way to deal with somebody. Start sending them a joke here and there. It's like something, this made me think of you. Actually, a really good thing with siblings, by the way, is to say, this reminded me of mom when we were little,
Mhm.
right? Or I just came across this, remember this photo? And it's just stuff like that. It's just like non-confrontational. And again, people they always feel like they have to, get to the wound, look at it. And part of the reason is because there's this kind of therapy industrial complex in this country that it creates tons of damage in a lot of cases because all it is rehearsing trauma. It's like, okay, another hour beating the dead horse of why you're sad. Like, come in here and tell me all your misfortunes and the things that are going wrong in your life. And all it's like, think about something better for Pete's sake. I mean, think about happier things. And, most of the things that you have, even with a sibling or a family member with whom you have conflict, most of the things that you have in common actually aren't the unpleasant things. And taking an opportunity to focus on what's pleasant and what isn't, using the means of communication that are less conflictive, less intense, less face to face, and are less likely to lead to new conflict. Just be creative.
Yeah, but the last resort is walking away,
Oh
correct? You
my
say
gosh.
fight
Yeah,
for
yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, it's dumb. It's a dumb thing to do for most cases, right?
Yeah.
And again, there are all kinds of reasons that people do that, and some of them involve mental illness. Some of them involve, in a lot of cases that I talk to, people will walk away from each other because of substance abuse. And these are
Mhm.
very, very special cases. And that's really not what I'm talking about. That's what actually requires the advice of a professional.
Mhm. Okay, so lastly, you write a lot about expectations in parenting, but how is that the key, and that's the key to a good parent-child relationship? But it sounds like that's also imperative in having realistic expectations with our family and what this relationship is gonna be and what it should be, right?
Yeah, when you're in this ATM relationship with your parents, one of the problems is they're not very willing to see you as an autonomous adult. And so one of the problems is that parents really resent when kids have their own opinions about things that differ from theirs, where
Yeah,
you
yeah.
wouldn't have that resentment for one of your peers. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give to people my age who have adult children is to be very, very curious about how they see the world. Like that, not judgment, not argument, but curious. Like, what do you think about this thing? I just read this article. What do you think about this article? I just saw that, listen to this podcast. If you have time,
Mm,
can you listen to this and give me your feedback? And just do it like I'm super interested in my kid. I'm just like, it's so fascinating as opposed to I have to impose everything I think on my child. That's the wrong way to be looking at it. And that avoids an unbelievable amount of conflict. It
right.
really does because your kid is like, huh, I can experiment with any sort of weird identity and my dad's not gonna freak out.
Yeah, yeah, just
Because
staying
that's actually
curious.
the best, it's like when I first started having kids, my brother, who's a little older than me, and he started having kids younger than me, younger than I was when I had mine. So his kids were a little older, and I called him up when I had my first son, and I was like, "Give me your best advice." And he thought about it, he's like, "Don't freak out." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He says, "You'll see. Just don't freak out because nothing good will happen when you freak out, right?" Pursuant to freaking out, that's when the unnecessary conflict leading, God
Yeah.
forbid, to schisms actually occur.
Well, I will say, I wish you were my professor in college because you're just so insightful. I've had so many aha moments, not to take a line from Oprah because you co authored a book. I wasn't trying to bring it all back around, but I have learned so much from you. This was insightful. And those Harvard students are so lucky to have you
Thank you, Paula.
in the classroom. So where can people, you write in The Atlantic, you're very
Yep.
active on Instagram, you've got how many New York Times #1 best-selling books? 13 books. So where can people stay in contact with you or keep
Thanks.
up to date with everything
Thanks.
you've got going
Yeah,
on?
the one-stop shopping is arthurbrooks.com. Everybody's got a website, and you can actually find out. I mean, my
Yep.
column in The Atlantic comes out every Thursday morning, so go. People who subscribe to The Atlantic will actually be able to read my column. And anyway, you'll get all the contacts for the books that I write and the podcasts that I'm on and all the interesting conversations. And my most interesting conversation today is with you, Paula, and I'm really grateful
Oh,
for
thank
it.
you. I thank you. I appreciate it. I know people are going to want to go in depth with this conversation. So that's when I would say, buy the book, Build the Life You Want, and you can read all about what we've been talking about. So, Arthur, you're great. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And it's really cool to see you sharing a home with your family, just
Right on.
creating that life that you want, right? So
That's
cool.
right.
So
That's right. Thank
awesome.
you.
Okay. Thanks. God bless. Thank you, Arthur.
Yeah. Bye.
Okay. A big thanks to Professor Brooks for joining me in conversation. You heard where you can connect. I do encourage you to get a copy of the book, Build the Life You Want, which, again, was co-authored with Oprah, and you can dive into that chapter about building your imperfect family. My takeaway is coming up in just a second, but a reminder that this is the last podcast of this season. I'm taking the entire month of July off. I will be back in full swing in August. But just because I'm taking a break on the podcast doesn't mean you can't continue to connect with me in my personal newsletter. If you haven't subscribed to it, go to paulaferrisofficial.com and make sure you've subscribed. You'll hear about what's coming up in the next season. We have some really great guests and conversations that we'll be having on the podcast. You'll also always get an authentic look at my life as a busy working mom, hear what's going on, and we have some really fun giveaways. So make sure you're signed up for my personal newsletter at paulaferrisofficial.com. Okay, it is time for my takeaways. I had an aha moment. The biggest thing that I took away was this. You don't have to like your family. You don't. You love your family. And when I say family, I'm talking siblings, parents, kids. You don't have to like them. It's totally different with your friends, though. You have to like your friends. You may not totally love your friends, but you have to like them. Otherwise, you really shouldn't be or wouldn't be friends with them. But that gave me a ton of freedom. I can love my family and I can be in relationship with my family, especially siblings, cousins, I don't have to like them. That for me was a huge aha moment. And I think has given me a ton of freedom going forward in my relationships with my family. If you struggle with family dynamics, just know you're not alone. Conflict is normal. It means you actually care and that your family matters. There is no perfect family. I don't care what anybody tells you. Happy families don't really even exist. And I loved when Arthur was vulnerable and admitted his biggest regret was moving away from home and not being close to his family, even though his family, his parents were really interesting. He's doing it different. I have that same regret and I want to do it different. You can do it different. He said that he and his 3 adult children, they picked a city where they were going to live. They all live on the same street. He's actually living with one of his kids and their family. You can do it different. And then don't give up on the relationship. You don't have to be friends with your family, but you do need your family in your life in neurobiological ways, which I thought was really fascinating. Otherwise, it's essentially cutting off your sense of self. I hope you got a lot out of that conversation. I encourage you to share it with your friends and your family because there's a lot of people out there that are struggling with family dynamics now, and it is worth it to fight for those relationships. All right, one more reminder. I'm going dark the entire month of July. Stay connected with me through my personal newsletter, or I'm always on Instagram. Make sure you're following me on Instagram at Paula Ferris, and I'll be right back here in August. Fired up, ready to go, and once again, ready to talk about it. I'll see you then. Enjoy your summer, everybody. I know you guys thought you were done with me, but not quite yet. I have one more thing to tell you about. If you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe to the show. I don't want you to miss a single beat or a single conversation. And remember, my DMs are always open. Tell me what you want to talk about.